Welcome. We're going to get started, even though there are some people who are still trying to find their perfect seat. We will nevertheless get started anyway. I am Lisa Brower, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening. I'm the president of the Linda Hall Library, and on behalf of everyone who works here, I extend a very warm welcome to you at this, our final lecture in the series devoted to the atomic age. It's been an exciting series made possible through the very generous support of Kansas City Power and Light, Bank of America, Swiss Re, and the Linda Hall Library's annual fund. We're grateful to all of our sponsors for their assistance with this effort. And if you've missed any of the lectures in this series and would like to catch up or see them again, all of our lectures are available as free downloads at the iTunes Store as well as on our website, which is www.lindahall.org. And let me say, while we're busy giving thanks, that great thanks are due again to Kansas City Power and Light because they are the sole underwriters of our current exhibition, The Atomic Age. If you haven't had a chance to spend some time with that exhibit, I encourage you to do that. Without KCP&L's support, this exhibition would not have been possible. Let me point out that on November 3rd at 9 a.m., the exhibition's curators, Nancy Green and Eric Ward, will offer a gallery talk and will also demonstrate the use of a Geiger counter on some very common household items. And additionally, you can see how Brazil nuts glow in the dark, I might add. Additionally, we're offering extended viewing hours for this exhibition on Saturday, November 6th from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. We're also hopeful that after the first of the year, we will have a few more extended viewing opportunities, but we just don't know what days those will occur. As always, you can follow the Linda Hall Library on Facebook, Twitter, and at our website. And if you're not on our mailing list and would like to be, please complete the card that has been placed on your seats and drop it in one of the baskets near the door on your way home this evening. And other than to say, please silence your cell phones during tonight's presentation, that concludes the business portion of the evening. And now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's guest speaker. Marv Fertel is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Nuclear Energy Institute. He has 35 years of experience in executive positions and consulting for electric utilities on issues related to designing, siting, licensing, and managing both fossil and nuclear plants. In November 1990, he joined the U.S. Council for Energy Awareness as Vice President of Technical Programs. And with the formation of the NEI in 1994, he became NEI's Vice President of Nuclear Economics and Fuel Supply. Mr. Fertel was named Senior Vice President and Chief Nuclear Officer in 2003. In that role, he was responsible for leading NEI's programs related to ensuring an effective and safety-focused regulatory process. He directed industry-wide efforts to ensure that adequate security is provided at nuclear power plants and to address generic technical issues related to commercial nuclear facilities. He also led NEI's activities related to the long-term management of used nuclear fuel, including achieving success in the U.S. government's program for the storage and ultimate disposal of used nuclear fuel. Mr. Fertel holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Northeastern University in Boston and a master's degree in civil engineering from the Polytechnic Institute of Technology in New York. And we are indeed privileged to have him here this evening. Please welcome Marvin Fertel.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Michael, for supporting this so that I could participate. It's a pleasure. The programs that you've had so far have been really very good, getting Richard Rhodes and Dwight and others here. I think that's wonderful. And I would second what Lisa said. Go see the exhibit they have. It's really very, very well done. I'm going to try and stay in kind of where the world is today for commercial nuclear energy, particularly in our country. But I'll answer questions beyond that during the Q&A session. And the only thing I would add, and in talking with some of the folks downstairs earlier, I know Dwight touched on nuclear medicine, and the thing that I've learned, which I'm mostly in the energy field with my career, is that nuclear materials play a tremendous role in our society. It obviously does energy, and we'll talk about that as the main thrust of my discussion. But nuclear medicine, we do 18 million nuclear medicine treatments in this country each year, okay? We do 100 million types of diagnostic stuff with nuclear technology in this country each year. And some of the stuff I mentioned to a couple of the people here, Eric and Bruce in particular, was that we use nuclear materials for everything from x-rays, you know, for making sure that things are built the right way, to filling beer cans, okay, to sterilizing cosmetics that the women use, to sterilizing things in hospitals. I know you've heard about the use of nuclear material for things like irradiating food to kill bugs and preserve it better, but we also use it in agriculture to make better fertilizers, to get rid of insects. So the ubiquitous use of nuclear materials actually has tremendous societal benefits beyond the stuff that we normally think about, like energy. And I'll leave you with that, but be willing to make some comments later if you have any questions and sort of jump into my presentation. First of all, this is a map of the United States, and what you can see is, you can't see it too well probably, but you can see 104 nuclear plants across our country. We actually are in 31 states with our nuclear plants. The plants closest to you here are Callaway and Wolf Creek, but we have 104 plants, and I think some of what I'll say today may be surprising to some of you. When you look at these slides, and I'll start basically with this one over here, what you see is nuclear makes up about 20% of our electricity supply in this country. And in another minute, I'll tell you the French get close to 80% and the Japanese get close to 50%, but I'll put our program in perspective on the next slide. The other thing you see is that we're producing about 799 billion kilowatt hours in energy from our 104 nuclear plants. And one of the things, we go up and we talk to Wall Street in February every year. We have a big meeting with our Wall Street friends up there. And the first one we had, which was probably about 10 or 12 years ago, we got about 12 people. We had 300 and some odd people at the last one, and it seems to grow as they're trying to understand what's happening with the current fleet as well as new plants. But one of the messages we tell them is about sustainable performance by the plants in our country. Right now, the media has made a big deal of a nuclear renaissance. And I deal with the media a lot, and it's got to have a lot of sexiness for them to want stuff. Either you're failing or you're doing something nobody ever thought you could do. So renaissance is the term they use. I would tell you, we don't think it's a renaissance. We think it's part of maybe a resurgence, but it didn't start 4 years ago. It started back in the mid-90s. Because if you look at the curves up there, if you look what happened here, we started to get excellent performance from our plants. And in 1992 in this country, we deregulated wholesale electricity, and a whole bunch of states started to look to deregulate retail electricity. And if your plant wasn't going to operate well, you probably weren't going to operate at all. And our operators decided they were going to operate a lot better. So they began to really improve operation, as you can see by that, and as you can see down here in what we call capacity factor. And that was the start of, in our mind, a resurgence. Because if we weren't doing that, we wouldn't even be thinking new plants right now, let alone continuing to operate all of our current plants. So it started in the 90s with incredibly improved performance. And one of the things, I'm kind of more electricity than nuclear in my normal background, but one of the things I am passionate about is the commitment of the people at the nuclear plants to operate safely and reliably. And I think they've been doing in our country an incredibly good job, and we basically set the standard for the rest of the world. If you look at what's happened here, and you looked at from the period of 1990 through 2009, you added about 28,000 megawatts of new nuclear plants by improving the output from our current plants. We did add a few plants, and we shut down a number of plants too. But if you just look at the addition, it's 28,000. That's like 28 new 1,000 megawatt plants because we were able to improve the way we perform in our current plants. And we're sustaining that performance. The other thing that is good for the environment, is good for the country, and is good for us politically, is that we make up over 70% of the non-emitting electricity in this country. Okay, from an electricity standpoint. what you hear sometimes, and at our plants, we emit no carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, particulates, or anything. The only time we emit anything is when we test our diesels from an emergency diesel standpoint. What you hear sometimes is, well, but that doesn't look at life cycle. When you look at life cycle, which means from mining uranium to getting rid of waste, and life cycle for wind and solar, we're equivalent to them on a carbon emission standpoint, and we're much better when you look at it per kilowatt hour because we produce a lot of kilowatt hours. So the message I would leave you with here is that we have a very good and very large program, and it's been very sustainable. This is a picture which shows you in 2009 the amount of kilowatt hours produced by the major nuclear countries in the world. And in America, we only get 20% of our electricity from nuclear. That's because we use 4 trillion kilowatt hours. 4 trillion kilowatt hours in this country. We basically use a tremendous amount of electricity. So for Mike, that's good, and for my utility friends, that's very good because they sell it. But it's an opportunity for probably more efficiency on our side as a nation. But from a nuclear standpoint, our program is bigger than the French and Japanese programs combined, which are the next 2 largest programs. Okay? It's bigger, and to be honest with you, it's better. We operate our plants safer, more reliably, and more economically than the French or the Japanese. They do certain things that I'm going to touch on later better than we do, but it's not in operating the current fleet. So to put in perspective, our 20% is a very, very large program. The other thing, downstairs we were talking a bit about, is the problem on building new plants a problem of politics, public support, or what? And my answer was it's a business decision. The politics aren't bad, and the public support isn't bad. We've been doing polling for a long time, and this is polls done in March. And what I would tell you is, first of all, energy is not on the psychic of the American public, okay? When you ask the American public, either any time this year, every poll I saw this year from any pollster had energy in single digits at either 4 or 2% as importance. The important stuff is what you'd think. It's employment, it's the budget, it's deficit, it's things like that. The economy is the issue in America today. But energy is not. So when I look at these numbers, I kind of recognize they're more visceral than thoughtful. They're not, the thoughtful, I've really thought this through, et cetera. But I'd much rather have good visceral numbers than bad visceral numbers. And these are pretty good visceral numbers. The one I would tell you that is more than visceral is this one. That's sort of a conditional probability question. When you ask the American public, when we do the opinion polling, what we say to them, if there was a need for more electricity, would it be acceptable or unacceptable to you to build a new nuclear plant at a site where one exists? And what we get is a very high number of it's acceptable. It deals with 2 important issues. One, need. I think we as Americans deal much better when we understand why we're asked the question. And if there's a need, they want to deal with the need. I think it deals with NIMBY too. Because if you don't have a nuclear plant near you, you're probably not going to get it. If you do have a nuclear plant near you, you're probably very supportive, except in maybe 2 or 3 locations in our entire country. We have tremendous support around every site. And it's because the people that work at the plant are neighbors of the people that live around the site. It's because the plant's been there for a long time and the people have gotten used to what it does and know the people there. So you have actually much higher support than you see in the other places when you're talking about around the site. This is something, and you can see it goes back to '83, on trending the favorability, which again, I would tell you is more visceral than terribly thoughtful. But there's an interesting thing in here, and that's why I put it up. We're at the highest numbers we've ever had on favorability, 74%, and that was in March of this year. That was after President Obama made a public announcement about giving a loan guarantee to Southern Nuclear for building a new nuclear plant in Georgia. And we have 2 perception gaps that I'm aware of since I've been with this organization when you do these things. We have one perception gap, which is a gender gap. We always have much higher favorability with men than women. So when you dissect any of those numbers, the men favorability is higher than the women's favorability all the time. The other perception gap, the other gap we have is a perception gap, and this covers everybody from members of Congress to neighbors. We ask members of Congress, do you support nuclear? And they say, I do, but I don't think my constituents do. You ask a neighbor, do you support nuclear? They say, I do, but I don't think my neighbor does. And we've had that for years, and I'm not sure we're closing that one too much. But we had a very interesting thing happen in March this year. The favorability by women jumped 20%. And when I saw that, I asked our pollsters and my communication folks, why? What changed? And the only thing that they came up with, and they don't tell me this is scientifically valid, it was their best assessment after a lot of discussion, was that President Obama made this announcement, and he was on, this was not a week, 2-week, 3-week CNN thing, but he was on CNN. It did last for most of that particular day. The president said some very favorable and good things about nuclear and why he was doing this from a clean energy perspective. And the assessment of the pollster people and the people that look at this was that they thought that the president had an impact. Part of their reason for that was that they had also asked the same public that they assessed for this particular question, did they know about the president's announcement? And 25% of the survey actually remembered it. And again, they thought that was remarkable, that 25% of the people would remember something that was just a few-hour CNN event, which tells you something about the influence of the President of the United States if their assessment is right. But that is the highest favorability we've had, and maybe more importantly, it's the best favorability we've ever had with women. Okay, one of the reasons we're getting better kilowatt hours out of our plants is we can improve performance in that we operate better, okay, we stay online longer, or what we do is uprate our plants, and what you can see here is uprates. So we're planning, we've had almost 6,000 megawatts of uprates, which is like 6 new plants, and we're planning about 3,500 megawatts of uprates, which means that we're either going to do small things like get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to allow us to operate at slightly higher temperatures and things so we can get more kilowatt hours out, or they're going to take something bigger and maybe do some turbine replacement and other things that get us a lot more, up to 15 or 20% more on a 1,000 megawatt plant. So you're getting maybe another 150 or 200 megawatts out of the plant. All of our companies, including, I'm sure, Wolf Creek and Callaway, are seriously looking at how do you get more out of the current plant and still operate both safely and reliably. And you can see it has a big impact. That's not a trivial amount of additional capacity when you look at it. Nuclear plants get a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for 40 years. Nothing in the plant is designed to fail in 40 years. Okay? You analyze for NRC, for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, all of your safety analysis based on a 40-year operation. Everything in a nuclear plant that moves, valves, pumps, et cetera, is in either a predictive, preventive, or corrective maintenance system. Okay? So nothing in a nuclear plant, it's sort of like your car, but it's like your car on steroids as far as maintenance. Okay? You're changing out anything that can affect safety or reliability from a standpoint of predictive or preventive maintenance. If it doesn't affect safety or reliability, you'll do it in corrective maintenance. You're not changing out things like your concrete structures and maybe your large pipes as part of a maintenance program unless you see problems in them. But if it's a moving part, it's a constant change. Very important at our plants. So what happens is we get a 40-year license. The Atomic Energy Act allows you to apply to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for another 20 years. Nothing stops you, we were talking downstairs, from applying for another 20 or even another 20, except the technical issues you have to deal with and the business decisions you have to make to deal with those technical issues. So right now, what you can see up there is that 59 of 104 plants have been granted another 20 years of operation. Okay, that doesn't mean they will operate for 20 years. It'll be a business decision by the companies as they continue. They've been given permission to operate. And you'll continue to upgrade the plant as you do that. You can see that 21 intend to renew and 18 are under review, and we have 6 who are still coming in. All plants will ask for license renewal. So we expect everybody to get probably a 60-year operating approval. What we're looking at right now is, can they operate for more than 60? And there's studies going on between us, the Department of Energy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Electric Power Research Institute, looking at those parts of the plant that you'd have to look at for greater than 60 years, your concrete structures. These are the things that are immovable, okay? One of the things that we were talking about before is that your structure where the radioactivity hits the steel that's protecting you from radioactivity, it hardens it. So at some point, you have an embrittlement problem. Our biggest problem for long-term are materials issues. We deal with very high temperatures, very high pressures, and a lot of radiation in certain areas. All of those things affect the material characteristics of steel or whatever your material is that you're using. So we have about a $65 million a year program that looks at material reliability. And what can we be doing to catch things early? What can we be doing to make things better? How many plants will go beyond 60? The Energy Information Administration somehow forecasts 41. I have no idea how they did that because we are nowhere down the road far enough to know what the issues are to go beyond 60 right now. But we will have a number of plants that go beyond 60 because it'll make economic sense and you can deal with the technical and regulatory issues. And that will get defined over the next few years as we work with the government trying to figure out what we have to do. But we will have to replace some of our plants. Some of them will shut down at 60 years, some of them maybe even before 60, and then somewhere between 60 and 80. Okay, I spend way too much time in Washington, so it's a pleasure getting out of Washington and coming to Kansas City. In fact, it's a pleasure going almost anywhere. But I did think it was important to put some perspective on how we perceive the administration right now. I don't have any slide on Congress. We have very good bipartisan support in Congress. We have a very small, very vocal minority of members of Congress who don't like nuclear. Otherwise, we have, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, actually very good bipartisan support. In fact, one of the challenges that I think we have with our biggest supporters, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, is getting them to understand realistic expectations on what we need and what we can do. Because the government can't edict that you're going to build nuclear plants. They're business decisions. They're decisions that public utility commissions are involved in. They're decisions that relate to other alternatives. So you can't just edict it. You can help it, but you can't just say it should happen. With the Obama administration, I'll be completely frank, when the president was running, the only thing he was clear on was he was going to stop the Yucca Mountain project, which is the waste disposal repository in Nevada. And everything else he said on nuclear was it ought to be safe, it ought to be economic, and we ought not to have proliferation issues. And we agree with all of that. But it wasn't a ringing endorsement. I can tell you that since the president won, he and his administration have actually been very strong on trying to help nuclear move forward. It hasn't been flawless in its execution, but the intent, I think, is there. They've improved the loan guarantee program for new plants. It still doesn't work right, but they've taken it a step forward in the right direction. They've looked at tax credits for manufacturing, which creates good jobs, and they've been very supportive of that. And one of the very important things they've done is they nominated 3 highly qualified people to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is a very important thing because if the Nuclear Regulatory Commission isn't effective, credible, and responsible, we're not going to get any boards of directors to make decisions on new plants or maybe even continuing to operate the current plants because the risk is too great on what the regulatory system might do to you. So we think the Obama administration on most things have behaved extremely supportive, that there are issues on implementation of some stuff that still have to be fixed, but in general it's been certainly good intent. As a result of everything I just said, new plants are in play in our country, okay? If we weren't operating the current plants well, we wouldn't be building new plants. If we didn't have good public support in general, and certainly around our sites, we wouldn't be building new plants easily. And if the administration and the Congress were against it, they could make it almost impossible. So we are seeing nuke plants go forward in this country. And what I would tell you is the expectations and the reality are still kind of apart a bit. In the current licensing process for new plants, it's different than the way we license Wolf Creek and Callaway. Okay, the way we licensed our current 104 plants was you got a construction permit, you maybe had 30% of the engineering done if you were lucky. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission requirements were probably still changing. And you built your plant, and then you got an operating license, and after you had invested 1, 2, 3, 4, however many billions it cost for your plant, you were getting reviewed to see if you could operate it. Not necessarily the best way from an investment standpoint, or to be honest, from almost any other perspective, but that was the system. The new system is different. There's a number of differences that make a lot of sense. You can basically certify designs. So you can see here that we have 3 design certifications in process, and we have 2 that we had already issued being revised. Now, in America, I graduated college in 1968, and when I started in this industry, we were talking about replication and standardization. And that meant we ought to build the same plant over and over again. To be honest, Wolf Creek and Callaway are very, very similar, and they're the closest thing to us as a country doing that. Palo Verde in Arizona is close, and a couple of plants in Illinois, Byron and Braidwood, are close. But the rest of our plants are basically different. The technology is the same, but the plant is different. The French, who took our technology, went forward and built everything in standardized plants. So they built families of the same plant. 8 of these, and 8 of these, or 10 of those, but they were the same. They were cookie-cutter plants. Now, they could do that a lot easier than we could here. In France, there was one electric company, electric utility, EDF, Electricity de France. There was one reactor supplier. There was one fuel supplier, and they were all owned by the government. So when the government said, do it this way, they could. In America, we have competitive markets. We have independent companies, and they want it their way. So I can tell you right now, because I sit in a lot of meetings, we discuss this a lot, that I really think we're committed to standardization, that we really want to build standardized plants. But only in America could I say that, keep a straight face, and tell you we have 5 designs going forward at the same time. And that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, except if you're the buyer, and the seller's trying to get you to buy their thing, and they're offering you a good deal. All the technologies are safe. All the technologies will be licensed. So it's what makes the most sense from a buyer-seller. I sincerely hope we stay standardized, because I'm going to show you in a minute some of the benefits of staying standardized. But what we have now is a new process that allows us to do certifications. We can do what you call bank sites, so I can go out and I get all the environmental reviews done and bank a site and not build on it for at least 10 years. I can just basically say, this is a place I may want to build. And then I can get a combined construction and operating license. Remember, we had a construction permit and an operating license. Now I can get a combined license. And to get that, I have to give the NRC all the information they need with a certified design. So I'm no longer designing the plant as I build it. And I know what I'm building, and the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, knows what I'm building when I build it. It's a much, much better process. It's untested till now. We're testing it now because we have people going through it. And to be honest, it's working pretty well. Are there some snafus right now? Sure, because we're not in the ideal process. But in honesty, it's working really pretty well on both sides. The regulators doing a very disciplined job of defining their requirements. The industry, I think, is doing a pretty good job in trying to satisfy those requirements and defining what we need to do. And right now, we have 2 plants being built. So when you hear there's nothing happening in America, that's not true. One, people are actually getting licenses. And this isn't cheap. To get a combined license is about $100 million. Okay, so it's not a frivolous activity. But what I'm doing is providing myself the option a building when it makes sense to build. Okay? If I get an early site permit, I'm doing the same thing. I'm banking my site. The design certs the vendors are doing, the Westinghouse, the GEs, the Arevas, they're doing that so that they can sell their products here and overseas. So when you look at this, people would say, well, why aren't you building? You know, if you've got 22 reactors, why aren't we building 22? Because it may not make business sense to build some of those right now. Okay, we're in a recession, demand is off for electricity. We have a real paradigm change in natural gas supply with shale gas, which right now is running at $4. Nothing competes with $4 gas that I'm aware of. So you got to make a longer-term decision if you're looking at building a nuclear plant or even a clean coal plant. And you wouldn't even be building a lot of renewables right now, except for renewable electricity standards, compared to $4 gas. Okay, so it's how you look at it from a business standpoint. This is a slide of Georgia, the Vogel site, where they're building 2 new plants. They have 2 existing plants there. They have 1,300 people working on that site right now. They spent $1 billion this year. Okay, they do have almost an $8 billion loan guarantee from the government on going forward on this project, and they're putting in a lot of equity and everything else as they do the project. It's probably about a $14 billion project for both plants. But they are building. They do not have their combined construction and operating license yet. They will get that late in 2011. So they're building stuff that's permitted under what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission calls a limited work authorization. And they are moving forward, as is, and I don't have another picture of it, but in South Carolina at the VC Summer site, they're also building. And they're putting in the stuff they can put in before they get their license. So we actually are building in America. I talked about the value of standardization. This is South Korea. Okay. Everybody but the Russians is using US technology. Okay. Everybody else is using our technology. South Korea just sold 4 units to the UAE in the Middle East, United Arab Emirates, for $20 billion. It's our technology. Okay. But what you can see here is what they've been able to do by build the same plant over and over again. Okay? They've decreased the cost to about 60% of what the first time costs were when they did it. And they've cut dramatically the construction schedule. And their goal is 39 months for construction. And I mentioned before that I think we operate plants better than anybody in the country, including our friends in South Korea. What we're seeing is that South Korea and Japan build plants really smart. They've gotten into modular construction. You know, when we go through the supermarket with the barcodes, well, they barcode all the pipe, they barcode all the parts, so they're sure what goes together. They build all this as modular things, and they plop them in place. Okay? Everybody, in fact, I was talking to one of the chief nuclear, actually he's more than that now, he's the president of the generation business this morning, who's going over and they're looking at building a new plant. He was leaving for Japan today for probably the 6th time this year to get a better read on how they're doing what they do. Even the Chinese are using good modular construction. And the plants we're building in Georgia and South Carolina are Westinghouse designs. They're called AP, Advanced Passive 1,000 megawatt plants. China is building 4 of those. The US guys are over there and they're getting good lessons learned from China on what we should do here, not to repeat their mistakes, but to do it smarter. So we're learning a lot on construction from the Japanese in particular and the Koreans too. But there is tremendous benefit if we can be disciplined in this country, which is a harder thing to do than to say, on staying standardized with what we do. I put this up here to show you the world is moving ahead. We're not going to build a lot of plants fast. We're basically saying in America that we're going to build 4 to 8 new plants by 2020. And I was meeting with some senior Japanese folks from their government last Friday, and they were disturbed that maybe we're not building enough, and they told me they were going to build 14 new plants by 2030. And I told them I was actually quite positive we would build 14 new plants by 2030. We won't build the 100 that Senator Alexander wants. But I think 14 new plants by 2030 is definitely in the cards if the economy turns around, particularly in the Southeast where the state regulators can make decisions on a longer-term basis than if you're in a market economy and you're competing, again, against $4 gas and trying to look at an $8 billion investment. But what you can see there is China is building like crazy. Okay, they are looking to build a lot of nuclear. They're looking at having 80,000 megawatts by 2020. Okay, but to put that in perspective, that would be 4% of their electricity supply. So they're building a lot of coal, they're building a lot of renewables, not only because they want it there, but because they want to export it. And they're building a lot of nuclear, and they're also always looking at what they can do in hydro. Russia is building like crazy. In fact, Russian reactors have more reactors under construction now than any other single country that's selling reactors. They've moved away from the Chernobyl reactor. They're actually using reactors like ours. So from a safety standpoint, they're much more improved reactors. And the Russians do everything in bulk, so there's a lot of safety built into them now. India is looking at building an awful lot, and they're looking at exporting. Every one of these countries is looking at exporting. Okay, it's a big world market that they're all looking at. And there's a lot of countries that frighten me potentially in getting nuclear, not from a proliferation standpoint, that may be there, but from a safety standpoint. You shouldn't be operating reactors if you don't have a strong regulator. You shouldn't be operating reactors if you don't have a strong operational infrastructure and the right safety culture. And it's not because you'll probably hurt people off-site. I think that we in the industry tend to say that the technology is unforgiving. I would say the technology is incredibly unforgiving. I mean, at 3 Mile Island, we screwed up a bunch of stuff. It made reactors incredibly more safety because we took operational safety much more serious. But we really didn't hurt anybody off-site. We scared a lot of people. Okay, we ruined the machine. What's unforgiving is the public and the political process. The technology actually protects people real well, even when you mess up. But in some of these countries, it's probably not ready for nuclear, and hopefully they don't go too fast in getting there. But you do have a lot of countries that are seriously looking at nuclear. The other thing that's kind of in vogue right now, and maybe really a good thing, is small modular reactors. Our reactors that we're looking at right now are somewhere between 1,100 megawatts and 1,600 or 1,700 megawatts in size, very big reactors. Okay, we're looking at here somewhere between 25 megawatts and maybe 300 or 350 megawatts. And the advantages are the things you think about it. Much less capital investment. I build them in series so that I get power from one and I got revenue till I build the next one. But there's a reason we haven't built small reactors in this country. Is we never could make them economical. Because with all the safety requirements, I needed the cost was up here and the denominator is how many kilowatt hours I'm putting out. And if they're real small, the denominator's too small. Now, we're in the process of working with people on this that want to build them and talking to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission about what should the requirements be. Do they need everything the same as a big reactor? If they're much smaller, the safety issues are much smaller too. So those discussions are going on. This could be both a good thing domestically and maybe a major thing for export. We have no very large manufacturing capability in our country. And if you looked at the slide before this, if you were going to build a large manufacturing facility, would you build it here or in Asia? You'd probably build it in Asia because that's where the market is booming. And they don't have NEPA requirements, and they don't have unions, and they don't have minimum wages. So you might build it there rather than here, but we could manufacture these and sell them. So this may be a good export market until we begin to build more larger markets. But the jury's out for the next few years, though it does have great potential. And if you follow some of the trade press and media, you'll see that they're talking about it a lot. I got to touch on used fuel. I mentioned that the president has opposed Yucca Mountain. Yucca Mountain is in Nevada. It's been studied for probably 20 years now. We've spent about $8 billion there. on every ology known to man, and some probably we never heard of. And it's probably a good site for a repository for nuclear waste. It's in licensing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they should determine that. But it probably is a good site, given all the information that's been public and available, and again, it's been studied to death. The president decided that we should look at other technologies. The president decided he didn't like Yucca Mountain. That's in the courts right now. I actually think the courts are going to tell them they have to continue the licensing review. I think that's where the court will end up on that. But what the president's doing isn't all bad. He's formed a very high-level Blue Ribbon Commission. It's chaired by former Congressman Lee Hamilton, who was also co-chair of the 9/11 Commission, and by General Brent Scowcroft, who was National Security Council advisor to a couple of presidents. And it has a very, very good makeup. There's very smart people on it, very responsible people on it. And they're looking at, should we be doing something else with our used fuel? There's like 90 to 95% of the energy still in that used fuel when we take it out of the reactor. Okay, so there's a lot of energy left. The French reprocess. Reprocessing may not make a lot of economic sense right now. It does for them because they built the facilities. You have the facilities, you should do it. It may make sense down the road for us, particularly if we're building a lot of nuclear plants, both from the standpoint of energy out and also maybe for better management of the waste product itself, make it more benign, less toxic. In the interim, what everybody agrees, what you see there is what we call dry cask storage, on-site storage. We store the used fuel in the plant in pools, but as we fill up these water pools, we put it in these casks. You can do that for a long time, 100 years or more probably. It's not what you want to do, because you want to move the thing off-site. You want to figure out whether you're going to recycle it or you're going to dispose of it. And I think this commission will probably provide some direction, and they will report out hopefully sometime. It's supposed to be late next year, but hopefully it'll be earlier than late next year so that there can be better direction. From a safety and a security standpoint, you can handle the waste real well. Okay, it's all solid, it's not liquid, you manage it real well, and it's not that it's not dangerous stuff. It's very dangerous stuff. It's very toxic, okay? But you could walk over and touch those casks and not get any radiation dose that you worry about. Okay, so it's very manageable. What we need to do as a country is get on a path for disposing of it through a process that is sustainable. And the reason we're not going to Yucca Mountain is one politician. It's the majority leader in the Senate who opposes it. And it's about that simple from a political standpoint. So whatever we do, we got to figure out how to make it a sustainable thing from both a policy and a political standpoint. I wanted to touch on security. Nuclear plants always had security. Okay, we've always had security at nuclear plants before 9/11. Since 9/11, we've probably spent about $2 billion improving security. We've increased our guard forces dramatically, and we've changed our whole perspective on security. I don't think before 9/11 security was necessarily focused on terrorist attacks. It was focused on people who would be deranged. It was focused on people in the plant who may lose it, but it wasn't looking at terrorist attacks, even though what you did could help you deal with a terrorist attack. We now are very focused on that. We're the only entity in America that's not a government entity that has what you call a design basis threat. We're the only part of a civilian infrastructure that literally does force-on-force exercises with people attacking the plant using lasers and people defending the plant using lasers getting evaluated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Okay, we've done an awful lot. The picture you see here is sort of, in safety we talk about defense in depth. In security you have defense in depth too in many ways. You have what we call the owner-controlled area, which we patrol, make sure nobody's there. If people are taking pictures of plants, you report it to the NRC, a whole bunch of stuff like that. As you move closer to the plant, you get into the protected area, there's all kinds of security things that stop you. And then we have what we call vital areas, and then there's a whole other level of security that happens there. If you visit a nuclear plant when we're not in an outage, the most people you see will be security officers. You will see some operators walking around doing certain things on their rounds, but the most folks you'll see walking in a plant, if we're not in an outage, are security officers. We have more security officers than any other discipline at our plants right now. I'm not saying that's necessarily good. It's a fact that we have. So there's a tremendous amount of security. We spend a lot of time with our friends at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, spend a lot of time with the FBI and others on this, and basically, while you never dismiss being ready, we are not a good target. We are a nice target on a list, just like the White House is, but we're not a good target. I mean, if you visit Wolf Creek or Callaway, you're looking at something that's rather intimidating from its physical size, and then you're looking at something that's rather intimidating with what you can see of security, like barbed wire fences and people walking around with very large weapons in black suits. So the thing that actually I think is the biggest incremental improvement we could have at security at our nuclear plants is integration with both the state, local, and federal folks. That's where we get a delta improvement at security. It's not what we can do at the site anymore. I mean, we can do a little bit at the site, but it's this. And this has been true since 9/11. This particular slide, I think we had in probably November of after 9/11. I think by October or November, we were using this picture saying, this is what we need to be doing as a country if you want to protect these facilities better. And there's progress there, certainly with the state and local folks. And with the feds, we're doing all kinds of, some good stuff and some silly stuff, but I think it's moving probably in a better direction for better support at the sites. And as you could imagine, when you start to go through something like this, command and control becomes a real issue. And it's really interesting sitting in meetings with, you know, when you're in Alabama and the FBI guy says, I'm in charge, and the sheriff looks at him and says, not in my county. You have a real experience depending upon where you are in the country. But what I would tell you is if you visit plants, you'll get a greater appreciation for security. We take security very seriously. There's no question we're better from a security standpoint than any other facilities in this country, except for maybe some of the weapons facilities that, you know, the DOE and DOD are protecting. I would end by telling you that, first of all, the current 104 plants are really doing a great job. And they are the foundation for everything you're going to see happen in this country from a nuclear energy standpoint. And to be honest with you, they may be the foundation for what happens in other places too. Because I think what happens in America, despite what others may say, it's sort of a gold standard for what other countries look at. Whether it's our regulator, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the operators of our plants. We are going to continue to do license renewal. I think all 104 plants will go beyond 40, probably most to 60, probably almost all. And then I think that we will see a portion, and I'm not sure whether it's half or what, but a significant portion go beyond 60, because it'll make sense from a business standpoint and a technical and regulatory standpoint, and we will have to build new plants. If you look at the projections that the EPA did or the Energy Information Administration did based upon things like the Waxman-Markey legislation, National Academy did some stuff just in general looking at climate change and what you have to do, they end up adding somewhere by 2050 maybe another couple hundred reactors in our country. Okay, we built over 100 reactors in the 70s and 80s. So you can physically do something like that. You saw what the Chinese are doing, and they are actually on target to do that. I mean, they are actually building. Now, they work 24 hours a day on shift. They have shifts going round the clock as they're building them. So we can build reactors here once it makes good sense and once it's clear what you're trying to do. And to be honest, we are going to shut down some of the 104. So even if you shut down only half of them, you got to replace them or you're going to have a problem on either electricity supply or emissions of carbon or other things. And it's not just carbon that's affecting the coal plants. It's mercury, it's other things that are affecting the coal plants right now. So we're going to build not that many right now, But between now and 2050, you will build probably another couple hundred of reactors in this country. Hopefully, we'll build them in families of standardized plants because that'll give us the best value from the standpoint of getting them done and from a consumer standpoint. It will be a change in our country. Going to a low carbon footprint isn't free, whether it's nuclear plants or renewables or it's clean coal. It isn't free. I mean, what happens if you look at the electricity price in the 70s, it's probably close, if you did it in real terms, to the price of electricity today, because the price comes down as we depreciate the plants. Okay? But the only time anybody that I know of, my friends, some of my enemies, look at electricity price is not when they pay their bill, it's when it goes up. Okay, and then they don't like it. But I mean, we use a lot of electricity. Okay, every new gadget we get is electricity. I just got an iPad. I plug it in every night. Okay, think about how many things you plug in every night. Think about how annoyed you are when we have a voltage reduction or some sort of brownout and you have to reset your digital clock. Okay? Electricity is not only kind of the basis for our economic growth and the lifeblood of that, but it's traumatic to our quality of life. And it doesn't come free, though it's not expensive. Okay? If you compared what you spend at Starbucks to what you pay for electricity and the value of each, would be an interesting comparison, I think. So I think we're going to see building more reactors, but I would think more in terms of the big electricity picture in this country if we're going to have a lower carbon footprint. I think new small reactors have potential, and we're going to try and get them developed. Now, a time frame, we're thinking 2020 for deployment. Sounds like forever, but they're just being designed. They got to be licensed, and you got to build them. So you don't have the design yet, you don't have them licensed, and you still got to build them. So 2020 may not be too far out. Okay, I'll stop there and would just enjoy taking whatever questions, comments, or suggestions you all have.
If you have a question, I'll come by with a microphone. What's the cost of producing 1 kilowatt hour by nuclear, by clean coal, hydro, and solar? What's the relative difference in producing 1 kilowatt hour from those different modalities?
Yeah, I have no idea what clean coal costs because we have no idea what clean coal costs yet. We got to know not only whether integrated gasification combined cycle works, but what do you do in carbon capture and sequestration, and we just don't know. When we're looking at large nuclear plants right now, and they're $6 to $8 billion, we're saying they're competitive with $8 gas. Okay, a gas plant, the capital cost is much lower than a nuclear plant, but at $8, we're very competitive with them from an operating standpoint. If hydro is cheap, hydro is about the best you can do. Solar is very expensive. Okay, if you don't subsidize solar right now, it's very expensive. The Chinese are going to probably help us. I was at Aspen for their energy meeting over the 4th of July, and it's a real eclectic group, and they're all really smart, and they're good people. And the solar guys and the wind guys were appalled that the Chinese were ahead of us. They were just apoplectic about it. And I said, the Chinese are stealing our nuclear technology. I said, we're building the AP1000 there. They're going to take that technology and then sell it after the 6th unit. I said, why don't you let them develop it and steal it? What's wrong with that? So solar right now is very expensive. It's subsidized in many positive ways, but I think the Chinese are going to help us. They are building a lot of, they need so much electric. Keep in mind, they're going to go from 10,000 megawatts of nuclear to 80,000 by 2020, and they probably will get there, and it'll be 4% of their electricity supply. I don't know what they're doing now, but 2 years ago, they were building a coal plant a week. Okay, so they're building a lot of solar, they're building a lot of wind, and they will refine the technology and try and sell it to everybody, and we got to figure out how to steal it, So I don't have good numbers for you, but I can tell you to gas because we look at that.
For how long will we still be able to use uranium till there's none left?
That's a good question. MIT just did a study. It just came out about 3 weeks ago. And their answer is 100 years. Because there's a lot of uranium in seawater, and they said we can find a lot of uranium. Right now, uranium is sort of the feedstock for a nuclear plant. That's what you start with to get your fuel. So right now in America, well, actually, I could say for the world, really, demand for uranium versus supply from the ground, from mines, about 60% of the demand is actually being satisfied by what comes out of the ground. The rest of it is coming out of either inventories or it's coming out of weapons material. We were talking downstairs, and I made the comment, in America, since 1994, because of a deal that President Bush did with the Russians, they were taking weapons material, high-enriched uranium, stuff that was in missiles pointed at us, that was weapons. They were blending it down to what you put in a power plant, which is low-enriched uranium. So rather than over 90%, it was down around 4% enrichment. And half of the electricity for our nuclear plants was coming from this since 1994. So 10% of the electricity in America was being fueled by material that was pointed at us in 1992. Okay? It came here much nicer, much better. That helped us immensely, and we haven't had to develop uranium. I actually think uranium supply for America is an issue, because the major suppliers of uranium have been Canada and Australia, a lot of other countries, Namibia and others. The mother lode of uranium right now is Kazakhstan. Okay? Not the most geopolitical, stable place in the world. But they could, if they wanted to, next year, produce more uranium than Australia and Canada produce combined. Okay? So from a uranium standpoint, there's a lot of uranium in the ground. There's a lot more uranium in the ocean. But from our standpoint on reliability of supply, it's not clear how we make sure we have reliable supply. Whether it's there, it can be in the ground, you got to get it. And what we don't do, Matt doesn't do this at Wolf Creek, none of our companies do this, but the Japanese, the Chinese, the Russians, the French, all are buying into uranium mines in Kazakhstan. Okay, so they're part owners. Now, does that mean that they can get what they want easy? No, but they at least have more leverage than you when you don't own anything. So I think uranium from a reliability issue is something we need to worry about. I think from a long-term supply, I wouldn't go to MIT's 100-year. I think we ought to be looking at some form of recycling in the next 30 years. And we couldn't do anything much quicker than 30 years, to be honest with you. You just couldn't get there that fast.
What is being done with the glassification of spent fuel, like the French are doing? We've made attempts in the United States, but where is that going?
Yeah, what the French do is they take the fuel from the reactor and they do what they call one-cycle reprocessing. They basically chemically break it down. They take out the uranium and they take out the plutonium. They use the plutonium. And then the rest of the waste that's left, which is all the kind of bad stuff, they glassify. They call it vitrifying it. And then right now what they're doing is they're letting that sit in La Hague where they do this stuff, and they're trying to figure out where to put it. And they're doing an evaluation. So they get some more energy out by the one recycle. We have not done that at all from the standpoint. We stopped doing that under President Carter in the mid-'70s. We stopped all efforts on that. So we're not doing that at all. The only vitrified waste that we have is defense waste, where for defense purposes, they wanted plutonium to make weapons. So they basically took plutonium out. What was left, they vitrified, and that waste they have to dispose of. So we're not doing any of that. Now, this Blue Ribbon Commission that I mentioned is looking at, should you do something like that? Should you go to what in the nuclear industry you call fast reactors, where you basically now take the product and put it into another reactor and actually, quote, use the waste to help produce fuel also, help produce energy also. We're not there. So right now, we do no vitrification. We do no reprocessing and no vitrification of commercial waste, and we don't even do it with defense waste anymore. We've kind of stopped.
Due to the time, this will be the last question.
This question concerns one of the slides that dealt with government support or grants. I caught sight of Southern Company, acronym AREVA, Uranium Enrichment Plant. This is all in one bundle. I would like to hear about that, please.
Okay. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 and then of 2007 created loan guarantee programs where the federal government could grant you a loan guarantee. It was for nuclear plants, for clean coal plants, and for renewables. And then the stimulus bill actually created a whole bunch of other loan guarantees for renewables. For the nuclear plants, what happens is you get a loan guarantee, but you pay for it. And in government space, if you don't pay for it, they have to appropriate the money, okay? So for the renewables, they just get appropriations, and they can just use the money until they use up the appropriations. For nuclear plants, there's been 2 loan guarantees that have gone forward so far. One is for Southern Company, the site I showed you, for Vogtle, and that's to build 2 nuclear power plants there. The other is AREVA is building a uranium enrichment facility, a gas centrifuge facility in Idaho, and they got a $2 billion loan guarantee for that particular facility. All of this came out of the same program. And right now, there's other loan guarantees being looked at. USEC, which is a uranium enrichment company in America, and they're looking for $2 billion in loan guarantees, and I actually think they issued some release today saying they think they're making progress. And also, a couple of power plants are looking for loan guarantees going forward to help them. The loan guarantee program is generally characterized as a subsidy. And in some respects, you could say it's a subsidy. The way I would look at it is there's a couple of things going on. One, for nuclear plants, you're actually paying for it. Okay, so you actually pay to get this, just like you would if you went to a bank. 2, I mentioned this when I was talking about moving to a lower carbon footprint. If we're going to go to a lower carbon footprint, we ought to look to reduce the impact on the economy and the customers. And our modeling, if you look at a merchant as opposed to a merchant plant as opposed to a regulated plant, because it's very different, a regulated space. If I'm a merchant plant and I leverage debt to equity, 80% debt to 20% equity, versus what I might do for a regulated company at 50-50. It reduces the cost of electricity by about 4 cents per kilowatt hour. If I get a loan, it's because the return on debt is so much lower than the return on equity. And if I get a loan guarantee, the cost of capital is less. I can't get 80% debt without either a whole host of partners, so I've spread it out over so many people that I can get it, or I get a loan guarantee from the government. So it actually helps reduce the cost. The counter-argument, and I'll stop in a minute, Eric, counter-argument that anti-nuclear folks say is all that means is you make more money, okay, because you now reduce the cost of producing it, you can sell it in the market, and make a fortune, okay? That's not true because I'm building a large nuclear plant, I'm going to sign a long-term power purchase agreement with people. Okay, I'm not going to play in the market every day. And I'm going to be able to do that because I have a stable price of electricity and they get a better cost than they think they can get in the market. So the loan guarantee program actually is something that we think isn't just for nuclear, it should be for all clean energy sources, including clean coal, to help you penetrate the market quicker and better.
Thank you, Mr. Fertel.
Thanks, Eric.
And thank you for attending tonight's lecture, and a special thank you to those who have been here for all 4 lectures. As a reminder, Coffee with the Curators, November 3rd, I believe that's a Wednesday, 9 a.m. and exhibition open house Saturday, November 6th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Thank you and good night.